Well, we made it back. We are in the book of Exodus. We are going to do chapter 8. You're already 8 chapters into Exodus. There's only 40 chapters, and chances are you've never read any of them. And that's okay. We're going to study them now. You're with it now. You are a Bible scholar. You're trying to learn the Bible. You should give yourself a round of applause and go get yourself some ice cream or some treat or something, because you're doing what about 90% of the church has never done, and that is study the Bible chapter by chapter. We're going to go through it. So we're in Exodus chapter 8. Depending on your translation, your version, you will have some verses that the Complete Jewish Bible doesn't have, or you'll have some more at the end. And it's basically just Hebrew doesn't need as many words. So we added some words to make it work a little bit better. Not the meaning, but that's what happens when you're talking about translations from other languages and other cultures. So let's jump right in. I'm going to read from the Complete Jewish Bible. Adonai said to Moshe, Moshe is Moses, that's his Hebrew name, say to Aaron, reach out your hand with your staff over the rivers, canals, and ponds, and cause frogs to come up out of the land of Egypt. Aaron put out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same thing with their secret arts and brought up frogs onto the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh summoned Moshe and Aaron and said, intercede with Adonai to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let the people go and sacrifice to Adonai. There you go. It's all over now. Wait a minute. Moshe said to Pharaoh, not only that, but you can have the honor of naming the time when I will pray for you, your servants and your people, to be rid of the frogs, both yourselves and your homes, and that they stay only in the river. He answered, tomorrow. Moshe said, it will be as you have said, and from this you will learn that Adonai our God has no equal. The frogs will leave you and your homes, also your servants and your people. They will stay in the river only. Moshe and Aaron left Pharaoh's presence, and Moshe cried to Adonai about the frogs he had brought to Pharaoh. Adonai did as Moshe asked. The frogs died in the houses, courtyards, and fields. They gathered them in heaps till the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that he had been given some relief, he made himself hard-hearted and would not listen to them, just as Adonai had said would happen. Adonai said to Moshe, say to Aaron, reach out your staff and strike the dust to the ground. It will become lice throughout the land of Egypt. They did it. Aaron reached out his hand with his staff and struck the dust on the ground, and there were lice on people and animals. All the dust of the ground became lice throughout the whole land of Egypt. The magicians tried with their secret arts to produce lice, but they couldn't. There were lice on people and animals. When the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God, but Pharaoh was made hard-hearted so that he didn't listen to them, just as Adonai had said would happen. Adonai said to Moshe, get up early in the morning, stand before Pharaoh when he goes out to the water, and say to him, here's what Adonai says. Let my people go so that they can worship me. Otherwise, if you won't let my people go, I will send swarms of insects on you, your servants and your people, and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of insects, and likewise the ground they stand on. But I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people live. Divide, elect, and separate. But no swarms of insects will be there, so that you can realize that I am Adonai right here in the land. Yes, I will distinguish between my people and your people, and this sign will happen by tomorrow. Adonai did it. Terrible swarms of insects went into Pharaoh's palace and into all his servants' houses. The insects ruined the entire land of Egypt. Pharaoh summoned Moshe and Aaron and said, go and sacrifice to your God here in the land. But Moshe replied, it would be inappropriate for us to do that, because the animal we sacrifice to Adonai our God is an abomination to the Egyptians. Won't the Egyptians stone us to death if before their very eyes we sacrifice what they consider an abomination? No, we will go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to Adonai our God, and as he has ordered us to do. See, we're supposed to do it the way he says, not the best way or the most efficient way or the easiest way, but the way God says it's supposed to be done. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go so that you can sacrifice to Adonai your God in the desert. Only you are not to go very far away. Intercede on my behalf." Moshe said, "All right, I'm going away from you, and I will intercede with Adonai, so that tomorrow the swarms of insects will leave Pharaoh, his servants, and his people. Just make sure that Pharaoh stops playing games with the people by preventing them from going and sacrificing to Adonai." Moshe left Pharaoh and interceded with Adonai, and Adonai did what Moshe had asked. He removed the swarm of insects from Pharaoh, his servants, and his people. Not one remained. But this time, too, Pharaoh made himself stubborn and didn't let the people go. So he's still hard-hearted, but we're going to figure out why and see how we can get him away from there. So the frog is a symbol of fertility in Egypt. So basically, this was like an assault on the false god, their false religion of all these mini gods. The supernatural part is really that Moses directed it. Like he decided when it happened and how far these frogs went, because they went all the way into people's homes, beds, into bread ovens, which are normally the driest places anywhere. Uh, and this normally occurs along the Nile between October and November timeframe. Some frogs, they do get an abundance of frogs, but nothing like this. Nothing that had gone all the way into the homes. They usually stayed around the river. So it was a phenomenon they were familiar with, but just not at this level. God had ratcheted it up many, many notches. So, and the Pharaoh's magicians, they could imitate it, but they couldn't stop it, which is really of no help whatsoever, because if I'm overrun by frogs and the only thing you can do is add more frogs, I don't really need you. The magicians were of no use. They're just adding to the problem. But it's a good God principle that Satan cannot undo what God's decided. He can only imitate, lie, cheat, steal, but he can't undo what God's already decided. So as you read in the end times, in Revelation and Isaiah and stuff like that, and you see where the Antichrist has power, but he can't reverse or undo what God's done. He can cause problems, but he can't reverse anything that God has already pronounced and done. God has only allowed him enough power to mimic things. So that's one of the reasons he's a false God, because he doesn't have real power. It's just copy, so to speak. So Moses let Pharaoh decide the time that he wants them to remove it. And I don't really understand why he didn't say right now. If I was overrun by frogs, I'd say, hey, how about right now, this minute? But he didn't. But Moses did this so he could emphasize the power of the God of the Hebrews. Because remember, it's still a people with one God. These people are slaves. There's nothing impressive about this God. So he's showing his power to the Egyptian people. And it's an overwhelming show of power for them. So basically, though, Yahweh could speak as God because God told him, you will be as God on earth. Who else has done that? Oh, yeah, Jesus did it. If Moses, and I'm not saying Moses is Jesus, I'm just saying it was a type, a shadow of what's coming. So if Moses spoke it, it would be done as God spoke it. That was how he set it up with him. So the people had to gather millions of frogs. They were everywhere. And imagine how bad it stunk. And then the Pharaoh, he hardens his heart, because in verse 15, when it says that when Pharaoh saw there was a relief from the frogs, he hardened his heart. The Hebrew word there actually means breathing room. Basically, when the smell subsided, he was like, yeah, it's not really that bad. I'm not going to do it now. I changed my mind. So when he got a little bit of breathing room, he's like, yeah, it's not as bad. Let's keep going. So, what happens when you have decay too? Then you get a lot of bugs. That's just the way it works. So the insects come, but this time again at a much higher level, and none of the Hebrews were affected. In Goshen, it didn't happen. All of the Hebrews and the Hebrew animals and property were all protected. So he divided, separates, and divide, elect, and separate. That's how he works. So this is the way the Lord does things, a natural phenomenon, but at an extreme level that no one's ever seen before. So at the end of days, we're going to read about mountains blazing out of the sky and sun burning 10 times hotter than it is right now. They're all natural things, but they'll all be at a level we've never seen before. So this is the third stroke and the last of the first set. So remember, we have the 1 and the 2 with warning, and then the third one comes without warning. So that third stroke of each set comes unannounced. So these insects were known to the Egyptians, but they also attacked the animals. And I misspoke. The Hebrews were affected by this one too, because it attacked everybody. But whenever the frogs, he separated. He showed them his power, how it didn't affect them. So this time they couldn't reproduce what God had done, which is really good, because all they've really been able to do is make everything worse. Your power has now given us more lice and more insects. So up to now, basically, they say, hey, it's not our fault. They didn't lose to Moses and Aaron. They were defeated by Hebrew God. And that's what they're trying to tell Pharaoh. It's not these two guys. It's something bigger than we've ever seen before. And I think Pharaoh understood he was doing battle with God. He was aware of what he was doing. And he just was so hardened in his heart, he decided to just keep going. But he's fully accountable for his actions. None of this was a mistake. None of this was an accident. None of this was from bad information. He made these decisions himself. So this stroke, the fourth, is the first of the second set. So now we see only the people of Egypt are impacted, not the Hebrews. He separated them out. And they're in the middle, so to speak. So they're like everywhere around it is affected but them. It's very obvious it wasn't just random or accidental. So God says, but I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people live. And yes, I will distinguish between my people and your people. And he still does. There are those that follow him, Hebrews, and those grafted into the covenant, and everybody else. That's the way he sees it. So these flies showed up from time to time, but what was different was the intensity. There were so many of them. And that they came at Moses' command. And these dog flies are really what we would call probably horse flies, but they got into the Egyptian homes, the livestock, the people. They annoyed everything, and they make your head just want to explode because they are so irritating. So the Egyptian citizens became really angry because they realized they're suffering, but the Jews aren't. The Hebrews are not suffering. And people hate it when one group seems to be treated special or thinks they're special. So they came at Moses' command and they left at his command. But the reason they're hated for the most part is because they thought they were special. They were set aside as God's holy people. And that's what we are. We have a special place with God. Believers in the Messiah, Yeshua, have a special place in God's heart. We are his set aside people. So that really matters. It's not that we're special. It's that because of our trust and our faith in Yeshua, he separated us from them. That's just what he did. It was his choice. So he distinguishes those who trust him from everyone else. That's the essence of salvation. And it's demonstrated right here in Exodus, not the New Testament, but the second book of the Bible. It's also the reason the world hates Israel and the church, because God distinguishes based on one thing: trust in Yeshua of Nazareth. That's how you're either in or out, not halfway one way or the other. So Moses tells Pharaoh that they can hold their festival locally, but the Egyptians just would go crazy because they didn't want to sacrifice a bull, which was considered a deity in Egypt, because that was an abomination to them for you to sacrifice a bull. And they didn't know what God was going to ask them to sacrifice. So Pharaoh says, Moses can take the Israelites and sacrifice to God. The Hebrew says Jehovah. He uses God's personal name, not Lord or God. Pharaoh calls the Hebrew God by Jehovah. And that's quite a concession, because he's admitting that this is a God. And what the Hebrews would be sacrificing, the bull, the ox, and cattle, those were all divine to Egyptians, so they wouldn't have liked that at all. And as usual, as soon as the dog flies left, he changed his mind. It wasn't as bad as he remembered it. And when we read that, we like to say, well, why was he so stubborn? Well, let's look at it this way. Remember when we had the pandemic and all we could talk about is getting back to normal, getting back to our way of life. And as soon as things became less bad, we all wanted to revert. And that's human nature. We all want to go back and forget the lesson we just learned. But we don't have to do that. We have God's word with us. We can learn it, study it together, share it with other people, and then it makes it a lot easier to live by and learn and just follow. Obedience is so much better. So that is chapter 8 of Exodus. God bless. Thanks for listening. Love God, love people, and change the world.